Hey seniors, so today we are back in Springboard. We're on activity 4.4, page 273. So today we're going to be looking at what we're going to call slanters or rhetorical slanters. And they're just ways that the media or people in general can be biased. And especially usually in speech, so like the actual words that you're using. So we're going to look at them. I'm going to walk you through each of them just to make sure we understand them, and then we're going to move on to our work of the day. So the first thing we have is a rhetorical analogy, and a rhetorical analogy is basically when we're comparing somebody to something else, but not in a positive light. Rhetorical definition is when we are using emotionally charged language to express or elicit an attitude about something. So capital punishment, which is the death penalty. If somebody were to call it, quote unquote, government sanctioned murder, we could probably assume that that person is against the death penalty, right? And they're trying to make an emotional appeal to you. So if we see the death capital punishment being called government sanctioned murder in a news article or something, we probably know what the author's opinion is on it. Rhetorical explanation is expressing an opinion as if it were a fact. So, an example would be Joe didn't have the guts to fight back, as compared to Joe did not take a swing. So let's say Joe did witness something and somebody took a swing at Joe and tried to punch him. If Joe did not fight back or did not at least throw a punch at the other person, we could say Joe did not take a swing, right? That is a fact. It's an opinion that Joe did not do so because he didn't have the guts to do it. There might be another reason behind why Joe didn't, right? It depends on the actual situation and the scenario of what's going on around it. An innuendo is when we are using language to imply that a particular inference is justified, as if saying, go ahead and read between the lines. So whenever we you have to read between the lines, that's an innuendo. So a very good example would be if you're listening to music and they're using words that your generation understands what they mean, but maybe an older generation doesn't. There might be an innuendo there. Downplayers. This is the use of qualifier words and phrases and punctuation to make someone or something look less important or significant. So this would be something saying she's a reporter for a blog that hardly anyone reads. And we put reporter in quotations. So you're really emphasizing that. Basically, you're saying she's not a good reporter. Hyperbole, right? An extreme exaggeration. We know that. So if we say that the school administration is fascist because they make you pull up your pants in the hallway, it's probably hyperbole, right? True surrogates is when we hint that proof exists, but we actually don't supply that evidence. We don't cite it. So we're saying, hey, it would be like if you said 9 out of 10 scientists or 9 out of 10 doctors or whatever think this. If someone says, oh, where'd you hear that from? Right, they might be calling you out, they might be interested, but if you just completely made that up, you're doing a true surrogate. And lastly, ridicule or sarcasm, right? Poking fun, making fun of the other person. So these are all examples of slanters that we're going to be covering. Here's what we're going to be doing today. You are going to pick 2 news articles that you see. It could be from the paper or it could be from online. I don't care. Okay, just Google it, figure it out. All right, so you are then going to tell me the facts, right? Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Those are facts. Give me how are they biased. So if you're reading an article, they might be biased to some of these things, but some of them they might not be. Okay, so just do your best. You're going to pick your news source, your article, and you're just going to give me an example of as many different examples of biases you can find. And if you're using the internet, which I'm assuming all of you are, make sure you put a link in your writing. We're going to do the same thing with our second article, but I do want you finding it from a different source. So let's say you use, I don't know, CNN for the first source. The second source, I want you using a different organization, maybe Fox News or something else. Okay? And then you're going to tell me the same thing here. Lastly, we're going to come down and we're going to say, how does bias affect the credibility of a source? So after you look at these two articles, you're going to cite some evidence why, and I really want you focusing in on this. How does bias affect the credibility of a source? Because every article, every example of media you run into is inherently biased because humans are inherently biased. It's not always a bad thing, sometimes it is. For example, let's say you are watching a national news broadcast and they're not talking about an event that happened, I don't know, at Amalie Arena or somewhere else in Tampa. They might not be talking about that because the only people who might be interested in that news story are people in Tampa, and they have a much broader, wider audience. So they might leave that story out, right? That's bias because they're going to pick what stories they think people are going to be the most interested in. And when you make that decision, you're being biased. So that's not a bad thing, right? Other ways of being biased, especially with the use of the slanters we covered, well, that is bad, right? So, like I said, what we're going to do is step one. You're going to pick a news source. One, tell me the facts on the left and the right. Tell me all the examples of bias you see. Step two, do the same thing with your second news source. Step three, tell me how does this affect the credibility of a source.